Okay, let us start. Hi, I'm Ryusuke Masoka, research principal with Fujitsu System Integration Laboratories, and I'm chairing this session. This talk is TLP White, right? And please mute your phone, and Q&A session is after the talk, when please use those standing mic over there and over there. The speaker, Erik Hjelmvik, okay, is an incident responder and software developer who has spent most of his career analyzing network traffic from malware and intrusions. He started analyzing network traffic from a security perspective while working at the R&D department of a major energy company, where he focused on SCADA and industrial control system security. Erik has also worked as an incident responder at the Swedish Armed Forces CERT, where he got the chance to focus even more on network forensics and network security monitoring. Nowadays, Erik runs the company Netresec, where he develops software such as NetworkMiner and PolarProxy for doing network forensics. And he's going to talk about the SolarWinds supply chain compromise. Now, the floor is yours, Erik.
Thank you, Ryu. Thank you. First up, by a show of hands, how many in this room work for a product vendor company? Could be software vendor or hardware vendor. Okay, thank you very much. As Ryu said, my name is Erik Hjelmvik. I run a company called Netresec, where I develop and sell software to help incident responders analyze network traffic from intrusion and malware. Some of you might be familiar with NetworkMiner. I also develop less-known tools like CapLoader and PolarProxy. You can find me on Twitter, where I tweet as Netresec, which is also my company name. But before I start, let's play a game. Imagine yourself being back at the office on Monday morning next week. So first conference is over, you're back at your office. When looking at this picture, I understand if some of you say, sure, but that's not what my office looks like. At least that's what I think when I see this picture. So I've therefore prepared this alternative picture to help us messy people imagining ourselves being back at the office as well. So this is not a picture of my office, but I have to admit I do recognize the situation where your desk is so crammed with stuff. So like, if you're gonna move your mouse from one side to the other, you have to like stick your hand in there and like, and eventually you get to where you want. Anyway, sorry about that. It's Monday morning, first conference is over, you're back at your office. And the DNS query for this domain, IF9 something something, gets sent from your company network. As you can see, it's a randomly looking domain name, or it's a randomly looking subdomain of the avsvmcloud.com domain. And my question to you is, will this DNS query trigger any alert or incident response action in your organization? Well, that depends, you might answer. Maybe it depends on which IP address this domain name points to, right? So the query domain name, the IF9 one, points to an IP address owned by Amazon. You see this 8.18 IP address. So would this have caused an incident response action? Well, that depends, you might answer. Again, this time maybe it depends on what the web traffic looks like to this IP address after it was resolved, right? To your surprise, My answer is that there is no network traffic at all to that Amazon IP. All that happened was that the DNS query is getting sent, and a DNS-A record is being received in response from, and then nothing more happens. That's it. So would this have caused an incident response action? Probably not. And the queried domain name even looks like something from Amazon's cloud hosting. In this slide, we have two different domain names. The domain name on your left is the one from the previous slide. You see the IF9. The domain name on your right is used by a legitimate service hosted on Amazon. Both domain names start with a random-looking string, followed by AppSync API EU West 1, and then either Amazon AWS.com or avsvmcloud.com. So as you can see, the domains are similar, but they're not the same. Okay, but what if two queries get sent? So the first query here is the previous one, the IF9. The second query is for a different random-looking subdomain of the AVS-VM Cloud domain. And you can see the IP address in the response for the second query also points to an IP address at Amazon, but a slightly different IP address. It's not strange to see domain names pointing to different IPs at Amazon. In fact, it's natural for cloud hosting services to move around or use round-robin DNS to achieve load balancing, for example. And the following 3 days, one query gets sent per day until July 7, after which no more such queries get sent. Note that the last DNS response at the bottom here, 6EI something, the response for that one is not an Amazon IP. It's an IP owned by Microsoft, this 20.140 IP address. That's slightly odd, but not alarming, right? As you might have guessed by now, these AVS VM Cloud domain names are related to the backdoor version of SolarWinds Orion that was released 2 years ago. In fact, these exact DNS queries shown on the slide were actually sent by one of the victims who had installed the backdoor software update of SolarWinds Orion. So the DNS queries were sent in July 2020 on these dates, but in 2020, so not this year. And after this victim received this DNS-A pointer, pointed to Microsoft, the backdoor would become completely disabled. Some people claim that this AVS VM Cloud DNS traffic was the result of a DGA, a domain generation algorithm. That's not correct. In fact, this DNS traffic was actually used for command and control over DNS by these threat actors behind the SolarWinds hack. The DNS C2 domain was active for 8 months in 2020. You can see here from February until October. During this time, backdoor updates of SolarWinds Orion were served to thousands of victims. And I use air quotes around victims because most of them were not targeted. All that happened was that they sent a couple of DNS queries, just like in the example I showed earlier. After that, the backdoor typically got disabled. These AVS VM Cloud DNS queries that I showed, in this example, they were transmitted during 4 days in July. I tried to mark that on the timeline. You see the green box in July. That's when this victim was sending its DNS queries. And after the AVS VM Cloud DNS queries stopped for this victim, you can see it stopped long before the command and control domain was deactivated. The reason it stopped beaconing to the command and control domain was because the attackers chose to disable the backdoor. They made an active decision. In fact, something like 99% of the victims got their backdoor disabled by the attackers. So only 1% were targeted with a second stage backdoor, and more on that later. Anyway, eventually in December 2020, So that's 2 months after the command and control domain was deactivated. Mandiant, or FireEye, as they were called at the time, announced that they had been hacked through a supply chain attack. This means that they were one of the few victims who actually were targeted and thereby got follow-on activity after having installed this Trojanized version of SolarWinds update. And Mandiant is one of the best incident response companies in the world. The command and control domain had already been closed down when they discovered the intrusion, but they still somehow managed to trace the infection back to SolarWinds Orion installation and figure out that it had installed a Trojanized software update. So here's a philosophical question for you. Had Mandiant not been targeted, would we even know about the SolarWinds backdoor? My guess is probably not. After the SolarWinds breach was discovered in December 2020, I spent way too much time trying to reverse engineer the code in the malicious software update. In particular, I looked at the code that caused these strange DNS queries. So I focused on just that little part. And as I reversed this DNS command and control protocol, I also built a tool called Sunburst Domain Decoder, which decodes the DNS queries, as I will explain soon. This code, my decoder, is available for download. If you just, through this QR link, you can get both the source code and the compiled version of it. So let me just walk through, in this example, this IF9 domain name, how it's decoded. Actually, it's only the orange part that's of interest. So the rest of the domain name there's no information contained in there. So we only need to parse the orange part. And I split it into different sections. So the first section here decodes into this first part of that string is an XOR key. So it's a 1-byte XOR key that's used to XOR encrypt the rest of this message. And then a victim ID, which is unique for each installation of this backdoor so that the attackers could see where these queries are coming from. And then there's a W, which in this case decodes into segment number 0, which means that this is the first message from this particular victim. And then comes 2HRS26, which decodes into O something something, and mask that. And then finally OG12EU1, which decodes into .local. And this O something something .local, that's the internal active directory domain name of this victim. So the AD domain of this victim is being sent. So some companies use their public DNS like something.com as the active directory domain name. Some use .local. So, but typically these domain names can, have the company name in them somehow. So, yeah, and I censored the active directory name here for that reason, so that we shouldn't be able to identify the victim here. But of course, if you run this domain name through my software or through my tool, you'll actually get the full internal active directory domain name for this victim. This meant that it was now possible to identify who had installed the malicious SolarWinds Orion update just by looking at DNS queries for this AVS VM cloud domain. So we didn't have to see which IP address these queries come from because we had the internal active directory domain name in the DNS query itself. I also discovered that this was a full two-way communication command and control protocol. So it was not just a victim that exfiltrated data to the attackers. The DNS responses, that's the IP address in this case, controlled what the victims should do next. Most victims were up on the left there that says send DNS beacons. So they were sending DNS beacons, getting one of these blue replies. In this case, the victim got this 8.18 Amazon reply, which means continue beaconing. And the victim was continue beaconing for a while until eventually it received one of these red responses, which means stop. And the victim in this case was the first one, the 2140, which is a Microsoft IP. And this is what happened to 99% of the victims. We're spinning around a few times and sending DNS beacons and eventually stopping. And they were stopped because the attackers chose that. They decided that we're not interested in this victim, so we're just going to disable our backdoor our foothold that we have in that organization. And only something like 1% of the victims receive the DNS response with an IP address in one of these green IP ranges, which means target. So they want to target that victim. And after that, the victim or the backdoor ended up in a different state where, down here, that says receive command and control domain in CNAME. So at this point, the backdoor was open to receiving not an IP address as a response, but a CNAME in the DNS response with a new domain name. If the victim was in that state, received a new CNAME record, it would actually connect to that new domain using HTTPS with a much more advanced backdoor that could do a lot of more evil stuff than this DNS backdoor could do. However, in my analysis, I primarily focused on the DNS part of the backdoor. So let's decode these 5 DNS command control messages from this victim in our example, this victim. So notice that this victim was left in the continuous state for a couple of days. So let's see here. It started with this IF9 domain name, which decodes into actor, director, domain, something.local. The command and control server, which was the authoritative DNS server in this case, responded with this Amazon IP, but you can see the last octet there, 139, that actually decodes into sleep timer. So it told the victim, go sleep for 1 hour, then continue beaconing. So the victim slept for 1 hour, then continue beaconing with the second H&H request here, which says, by the way, I'm running these are in the installed antivirus products I'm using. So it says I'm running Carbon Black, and it sends the current time as well with the timestamp. This time, the command and control server said, now you sleep for 1 day, but continue beaconing. So the victim would continue beaconing, but after 1 day, it had already sent, this is what the only thing the DNS backdoor could do. It could send domain name and install antivirus products. That's it. So it had already sent everything it had. So by now, it was just sending what I call a ping command. And the ping command, all it contained was a timestamp. So it says, here's the current time. I don't know why it sent the times there, but it did. And then it continued so for a couple of days until eventually it sends this 6E1 query, which was also a ping command. But at this time, the attackers see that, oh, we're not interested in this company called something who are running Carbon Black. So we'll just disable our backdoor we have in that organization and respond with this Microsoft IP. And that's it. So notice this victim sent these so-called ping packets, which for some reason contain a timestamp. So maybe the timestamp was there to protect against replay attacks in the command and control protocol, or maybe something else. I actually don't know. As I mentioned before, the DNS queries could be used to identify which companies or organizations who had installed the Trojanized SolarWinds Orion update. It turned out that there were several people who had access to passive DNS queries that had been sent to this AVS VM cloud domain. These persons helped share such DNS queries so that victim organizations could be identified and notified. So I would like to thank Joe, John, Paul, Danko, Rohit, and someone called Kira 2.0, whoever you are. So the DNS queries could be used to tell who had installed the backdoor software update. And the DNS responses, the IP addresses, could be used to tell who had been targeted, right? But the passive DNS data shared by these persons primarily included the DNS queries, not the responses. So how could we determine which organizations had been targeted so that they could be notified? After digging even deeper into the DNS command and control protocol, I discovered there was a single 1-bit flag encoded into the DNS ping queries, the ones with just a timestamp. So this is what these ping queries look like. First, there's this 8-bit or 1-byte XOR key. Then there's the victim ID telling the attackers who they are. And then there are 4 bytes, which are typically always, at least in the traffic I observed, 001. And then finally, there's a 19-bit timestamp field. And by the end there's a single bit that I didn't first understand what it was. It took me some time. Then finally I realized that's a flag. It gets set when a victim receives one of these target IP addresses. It sets this flag in the subsequent ping packets. And so that's a way for the victim to say, tell the command control server, I am now ready to receive a CNAME as a pointer instead of just an IP address to move on with HTTP traffic. So with this knowledge, I was now able to decode which victims who had been targeted by the threat actors only by looking at the DNS queries. I didn't need the responses. So one thing I noticed was that the backdoor update had been installed by lots of big corporations, banks all around the world, but the threat actors seemed to be interested primarily in American tech and telecom companies, US government agencies, and European Union agencies. This also seems to be in line with what Microsoft reported about this threat actor. They refer to them as Nobelium. Others know them as APT29 or Cozy Bear. Also, a bonus find, which I haven't actually mentioned before. You see the 19-bit timestamp field here. The code used to generate that timestamp looks like this. This is C# code. What it does is it converts the current time into a number. And the number is the number of 13-minute intervals that have passed since January 1st, 2010. So that means that the time resolution is 30 minutes. The minimum timestamp that could be transmitted is January 1st, 2010, of course. And the maximum timestamp, since it's a 19-bit field, would be December 4, 2039. So it's like way ahead into the future. And one thing that bugged me is that the DNS command and control to this AVS VM cloud was only active for 8 months during 2020. Why didn't it start the time span from 2020 or maybe 2019? If they wanted a round number, they could have started from 2000. It would still be enough. So this is actually bugging me a bit. So maybe the protocol has been used before. Maybe the SolarWinds weren't the first victim to have their software backdoored by this threat actor. I don't know that, of course, but it's an interesting thought. And if this DNS command and control protocol actually has been used before, then I would guess that one reason that they weren't detected back then is probably because they didn't choose to target Mandiant in that campaign. But this time they did, and they were discovered. It's very difficult to defend against supply chain attacks. So I have no silver bullets for defenders. So sorry about that. Like the first bullet here, since you've got that covered because you're members of FIRST, so you probably have a CERT or CCERT or SOC, right? So good. So apart from that, like do the same old boring stuff as you're already doing, right? You're probably on a good path. But generally, I'd say fewer systems, and trust fewer systems, trust fewer vendors. And I also want to stress this final point. Monitor. So this hack was revealed in December 2020. And that was several months after this command and control domain had been deactivated. And very few organizations were actually able to tell if they had sent DNS queries for this AVS VM cloud domain. In this case, just a simple passive DNS log of outgoing queries would be enough to tell if they had installed the Trojanized SolarWinds update, but also to tell if they had been targeted. And to vendors, all you vendors who reached up your hand in the beginning, my advice to you is don't get hacked. It really sucks when vendors get hacked and attackers get free backdoors inside the networks of the customers of that vendor. And for vendors to not get hacked, just do the same old boring stuff as on the previous slide. But I've actually got more advice to vendors. And I'm a vendor company myself. I'm running a vendor company, so this is for me as well. And what happens to SolarWinds, this thing can happen to any software company. So my second advice to vendors is eat your own dog food, which basically means that vendors should use their own products. And dog fooding, as it's called, it's a great way to improve product quality and security since it puts the vendor into the shoes of the customer. And my third advice is here delivered by Vanilla Ice. It's to stop building complex solutions that require admin or root privileges or unconstrained internet access. And instead, collaborate with your customers and let them know how your product can be integrated into their CM or EDR and what internet resources your product needs to access so that they can limit like outbound traffic. And finally, listen to your customer requests. Your customers probably know more than you about how to deploy your products in their environment in a secure manner. And the end goal here is to enable customers to verify that your product has not been backdoored and to minimize the consequences if it would ever get backdoored. I was originally planning to present my vendor advice like this, but I realized that all this text would probably just make you fall asleep since this is the last talk for today. So let's just pretend you never saw the slide. And instead, let's move on to the summary. So in summary, the SolarWinds Orion backdoor it used DNS-based command and control protocol. The DNS traffic was designed to blend in with normal traffic. And the threat actor handpicked targets from a huge pool of victims, and the ones they didn't handpick were disabled, so that to decrease the likelihood of them becoming detected, of course. And these victims and target victims could be identified just using passive DNS. And vendors, please don't get hacked, eat your own dog food, and stop, collaborate, and listen to your customers. And finally, by the way, I have so much more technical information I would like to share, but this is not the right medium. But I have written a lot of technical blog posts on this topic. So on this link on the right here, you can find all my blog posts on this topic, as I actually wrote this decoder, and I was really into the protocol. Now this is a year and a half ago, so I've probably forgotten most of the details that's in the blog post. Yeah, that's it. So I'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
Wow. I have heard a lot about the SolarWinds thing, but I never got this deep dive. Thank you. Any questions? Oh, you are ready.
Kautuopio Enison. On this, I would say, victim type bit that you described there.
The targeted bit.
Yeah, what?
The targeted bit?
Yeah, I mean, if you go back in the slides, you had this go in the here.
Oh, okay.
So, how did that targeted flag be set? So this was.
Yes. Okay. One moment. If I'll skip back until here, when the victim received one of these green replies that says targeted, and the victim proceeds down to the second state here. So it started out in the send DNS beacon state, and then transited into this receive command and control domain state. When it was in this state, every time it sent a ping command, it will have this flag set, or ping query. That's when this flag was set. And that means I am now ready to receive a CNAME as a response.
And that was set by the attacker during this ping process?
The attacker set it by just sending a DNS A record in any of these green. Sending any of these green.
So one of these is government, one of this is.
No, I have no idea. Maybe, but it doesn't have to be. They could reply with any of these. The flag would be set regardless of which.
Okay.
Hi, Martin Ayan from Mnemonic. I was also kind of fascinated by this January 1st, 2010 start of the timestamp. Have you tried digging into historical PDNS
So I didn't hear the P.
Have you tried analyzing historical PDNS records to see if you can identify any prior use of that protocol?
So far, I haven't seen that, but of course, no, I haven't done that. Actually, a thought has crossed my mind too. I realized then we need to look for this protocol, but probably for other domain names, right? Other main domains. So that would be an interesting thing to do. So, but I haven't done that. And
no, they might have used a different XOR key as well. But as a first pass, if you only look at the first part of the subdomain, and you try with the XOR key that you observed from SolarWinds.
It would be possible, actually, to just give it a bunch of domain names, see which ones are possible to decode with this decoder. You would get some false positives, of course, but what if you end up with one domain where, like, we get lots of domains which actually we're able to parse? Then that would mean that we would have found a previous domain name. So exact same idea is what I've had. I haven't done that. So if anyone is interested, my source code for my decoder is there. Feel free to use it. If you have any questions, please ask me. But you have to have a lot of passive DNS. I don't have a lot of passive DNS, so that's my issue. I can write the code, but I don't have. You have the data.
We do.
Cool. Let's talk. Thank you.
And the group of people that you got the passive DNS data has a truckload of passive DNS data. So just send a bit of advice to them. They might do some runs.
Yeah, thank you. Good advice.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh, here you are.
Hello.
Hello.
So I'm just, what do you think? Because you say that if they hadn't targeted targeted Mandiant, but would Mandiant have seen this if the attackers hadn't gotten greedy and started stealing tools?
I don't know. I actually don't. I have no inside information from Mandiant of what part of the attack actually caused them to detect this, or like how they detected it in the first place. So good, interesting question. I mean, if maybe they could have targeted them, but do it a bit more like not as aggressive, because maybe the attackers got more aggressive over time and eventually they were detected. So maybe they were overconfident. Or maybe they didn't care that they were detected. Like they already had enough systems or the information they needed, and maybe like they didn't need to stay quiet anymore. I don't know. I just theories. So I actually don't know more than you guys do. But good question, Margot. Thank you.
Any other question? Okay, let us thank the speaker again. Please take your time to fill the survey and submit it in your mobile app. And this is the last talk today. So good day, good night. Bye.
App and stickers, come here.
Thank you.
Thank you.